Marriage has long been recorded as the cornerstone of civilization, an institution promising stability, legacy, and fulfillment. For men, it has been framed as the final step into adulthood, the proof of responsibility and strength. Yet beneath these promises, the record reveals a consistent pattern: obligations imposed, freedoms reduced, and benefits unevenly distributed. This chronicle examines how marriage has been constructed, how it operates, and why so many men emerge from it diminished rather than fulfilled. Across recorded history, marriage has been framed as one of the defining markers of male adulthood. In early agrarian societies, the institution was tied not to sentiment, but to economic and legal stability. Land ownership, inheritance rights, and the legitimacy of heirs were all safeguarded through marriage contracts, ensuring continuity of family lines and the preservation of wealth within specific groups. In many cultures, a man without a wife was viewed as incomplete, lacking both social recognition and the ability to secure his lineage. Records from classical civilizations, including Roman law and early European feudal codes, reflect this orientation. Marriage was less a personal decision and more an obligatory step in fulfilling one's role within the broader structure of society. As societies modernized, the overt legal and economic rationale remained, but was increasingly supplemented by cultural narratives of companionship and respectability. The 19th and 20th centuries saw marriage marketed as both a civic responsibility and a personal milestone, reinforced by state policies, religious institutions, and expanding mass media. For men, entering marriage was described as an act of maturity, one that converted individual existence into recognized social standing. The unmarried man was often labeled irresponsible, unstable, or incomplete. Popular literature, advertising, and cinema repeatedly echoed this expectation, portraying husbands as fulfilled, respected, and integrated into the community in ways bachelors were not. In this framework, marriage was presented not merely as a partnership, but as the culmination of male development. The promise was clear. Through marriage, a man would acquire stability, companionship, and a respected position in society. The institution appeared to offer equality and shared benefit, binding two individuals in a union that supposedly balanced responsibilities and rewards. Yet the historical record shows that this promise often functioned as an idealized image rather than a lived reality. The contrast between what marriage symbolized and what men experienced in practice forms the basis for the inquiry that follows. If the institution was designed as a gift, a marker of fulfillment and respect, why is it that so many accounts reveal men diminished, burdened, or drained within it? This contradiction invites closer examination of the mechanisms that operate once the marital bond begins. The transition from courtship to marriage often marks a reorganization of authority within the household. While the institution is publicly described as a partnership, evidence drawn from sociological studies and legal precedents indicates that the balance of control rarely remains equal in practice. Once the union is formalized, financial resources, domestic responsibilities, and decision-making processes begin to concentrate in ways that diminish male autonomy. What had been presented as a shared arrangement gradually assumes the character of a hierarchy, with the man increasingly positioned as provider and the woman as central organizer of household life. Household finance is a primary site of this reallocation. Surveys conducted in the late 20th and early 21st centuries reveal consistent patterns. Although men contribute a significant share of household income, women are more likely to manage day-to-day expenditures and direct how pooled resources are allocated. Legal rulings in divorce settlements reinforce this distribution, frequently awarding custodial and financial advantages to women, thereby institutionalizing the expectation that men's income is a resource to be shared, while women's decision-making over that resource is granted implicit authority. Studies of income management describe this not as open conflict, but as a quiet, systemic tilt in control. Domestic decision-making follows a parallel course. Research in family sociology documents that choices concerning residence, schooling of children, and household organization are most often shaped around the needs and preferences of the wife. Men are expected to accommodate these decisions, with their role defined less by joint negotiation, and more by the responsibility of enabling those outcomes through financial and practical support. The position of husband becomes equated with a functioness role, the steady provider who maintains the structure rather than a co-equal participant in its direction. This redistribution of authority is rarely abrupt. It unfolds subtly, reinforced by social norms, legal expectations, and the everyday administration of shared life. The cumulative effect, however, is clear. Men find their independence eroded not through overt coercion, but through systemic arrangements that redirect their resources and reshape their roles. This gradual transformation sets the stage for the next development, the erosion of individuality and the slow disappearance of the man as a distinct figure within the marriage. The progression of marriage often coincides with a measurable reduction in male individuality. Data from time use studies provide consistent evidence. Leisure hours available to men decline markedly after marriage, with additional reductions following the birth of children. Activities once associated with personal development or recreation, such as sports, hobbies, or informal social gatherings, are displaced by domestic obligations and employment responsibilities. The pattern is not merely anecdotal, but quantifiable, with surveys from Western and Asian contexts alike recording a contraction of male free time compared to both their unmarried counterparts and their female spouses. Friendships, too, undergo attrition. Studies of social networks reveal that married men maintain fewer close friendships than single men or women within comparable age groups. Regular contact with peers diminishes as schedules orient around family commitments, and the maintenance of long-standing bonds is frequently deprioritized. The result is a narrowing of social identity, in which men are less recognized as individuals within a network and more defined by their position inside the family unit. Parallel to these social reductions is the redefinition of professional choices. Employment patterns show men increasingly prioritize stability and income over personal fulfillment or advancement in areas of interest. Career moves that might involve risk, relocation, or uncertainty are often foregone in favor of providing consistent financial support. The husband-father identity thus extends into the workplace, redirecting decisions away from the individual's preferences toward the requirements of the domestic structure. The cumulative effect is a gradual disappearance of the man as a distinct figure. His identity shifts from that of an autonomous individual shaped by friendships and pursuits to that of a functional role-bearer, provider, husband, father. The process is neither abrupt nor externally enforced, but emerges through the layered demands of the marital framework. Documented reductions in leisure, companionship, and independent decision-making illustrate this transformation with clarity. This structural loss of identity, though normalized as maturity or responsibility, simultaneously produces a sense of confinement. The erosion of autonomy creates the conditions for entrapment, a progression that defines the next stage of the marital experience. Marriage introduces a layered structure of responsibility that consistently weighs more heavily on men. Census data and workplace studies confirm that men remain the primary financial providers in most households, even in societies where women's workforce participation has increased significantly. In the United States, for example, Bureau of Labor Statistics reports show that married men work longer hours on average than both single men and married women. Similar patterns are observed in European and Asian economies, where male breadwinning, though no longer formally mandated, continues to dominate family arrangements. The role of provider is reinforced not only by income expectations, but also by the structural organization of household duties. While women have expanded their participation in professional life, surveys consistently record that men bear the larger share of financial responsibility, with household stability tied to their consistent earnings. Employment choices reflect this weight. Men in marriages with dependents are less likely to reduce hours, change careers, or take professional risks, cementing the expectation that their role is to maintain uninterrupted provision. Beyond financial demands lies the growing expectation of emotional labor. Research in family sociology highlights that men are often positioned as the stabilizing figure, tasked with listening, resolving disputes, and absorbing the pressures of domestic life. Unlike financial provision, this form of responsibility is less visible and rarely quantified, yet it constitutes a significant extension of the husband's role. Emotional support, encouragement, and problem-solving become obligations assumed as part of maintaining harmony within the household. Despite these dual burdens, financial and emotional, the recognition of men's contributions remains limited. Studies on marital satisfaction show that while women's roles are increasingly acknowledged as multidimensional, men's responsibilities are viewed as baseline duties, unworthy of special attention or relief. The trap lies in the combination. Obligations expand with time, while acknowledgement or support does not grow proportionally. This arrangement has persisted across generations, not by deliberate enforcement, but through cultural normalization. Men rarely contest these expectations openly, instead accepting them as inherent to their role. The question that emerges is why this silent compliance continues, and how cultural forces sustain it. This inquiry leads directly into the conditioning mechanisms that reinforce acceptance of the imbalance. Across centuries, societies have cultivated a narrative that links manhood with marriage. Religious institutions, cultural traditions, and familial expectations combine to form a framework in which marriage was not an option, but a marker of maturity. In Christian Europe, the Church codified marriage as a sacrament, reinforcing it as both moral and civic duty. In South Asia and the Middle East, family honor was tied to a man's willingness to marry and provide, with extended kin networks viewing bachelorhood as instability. Industrial-era state policies further encouraged this framework, offering tax incentives to married men and privileged household formation as a stabilizing mechanism for the workforce. Statistical evidence reinforces this trend. Census records from the 20th century consistently show that married men outnumbered lifelong bachelors by wide margins, even in urbanized modern economies. In the United States, mid-century surveys recorded marriage rates among men above 90% by the age of 40, with bachelors often regarded in census annotations and newspapers alike as exceptions to the social rule. Similar findings are echoed in European registries, where unmarried men were frequently described with terms implying incompleteness or deficiency. Cultural conditioning also operated through media and community norms. From mid-century advertising campaigns to contemporary cinema, the motif of the settled man persists as a measure of responsibility. Popular magazines in the 1950s and 1960s routinely portrayed bachelors as self-indulgent, while sitcoms in the late 20th century constructed family men as respectable archetypes. In many regions, this cultural script endures. Men who delay marriage are still subject to reputations of immaturity, selfishness, or avoidance of responsibility. The weight of this conditioning has ensured that men rarely evaluate the risks of marriage in isolation. The combination of religious duty, cultural continuity, and social stigma has positioned marriage less as a choice than as a rite of passage. By the time economic and legal realities emerge as consequences, the groundwork of obligation has already been laid. These pressures, functioning silently yet persistently, shape men's willingness to accept future sacrifices, most notably in the financial domain, which forms the next layer of responsibility to be examined. Marriage introduces a financial structure that rarely preserves individual autonomy. In most jurisdictions, assets accumulated during the union are legally reclassified as joint property, while pre-existing debts frequently remain the responsibility of the individual who incurred them. This redistribution creates asymmetry. The pooling of income and possessions serves the family unit, but the liabilities do not dissolve in equal measure. Legal frameworks further illustrate this imbalance. In the United States, divorce courts consistently apply equitable distribution or community property standards, both of which prioritize spousal support and child maintenance over preservation of individual wealth. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau show that roughly 1 in 4 divorced men is required to pay alimony, while child support obligations are more common, applying to over 60% of fathers with dependent children. Across European states, comparable legislation exists, mandating income transfers that can extend for years after the dissolution of marriage. Income statistics also reveal patterns of financial sacrifice. In dual-income households, men's earnings remain disproportionately directed toward mortgage payments, education expenses, and long-term family investment. Labor market studies note that men, particularly in middle-income brackets, report higher rates of extended working hours after marriage. This phenomenon is often framed as career advancement for the family, though the professional risks, burnout, stagnation in flexible opportunities, and diminished personal mobility fall unevenly on men. Divorce introduces the most quantifiable risk. Studies published by legal associations indicate that men's post-divorce standard of living declines by an average of 25 to 30%, while women's, despite receiving alimony or child support, often shows less severe contraction. Pension T, transfers, home equity division, and ongoing support obligations together redefine men's financial trajectories for decades. These financial arrangements are not framed as punitive, but as mechanisms to preserve household stability and child welfare. Yet the outcome remains consistent. Men assume a disproportionate share of risk, both during the marriage and after its dissolution. This acceptance of financial burden extends beyond material calculation. It leads directly into the erosion of personal freedom, where income and assets become not instruments of individual choice, but obligations to a system that prioritizes collective maintenance over individual autonomy. Marriage is frequently presented as the gateway to stability, a shared home, predictable routines, and long-term planning. Yet the cost of this stability is often the reduction of personal autonomy, particularly for men. Decision-making, once individual, becomes collective in name, but unequal in practice. Relocation patterns, for example, illustrate this shift. Census migration data reveal that family moves are most often tied to the career opportunities of one partner or to proximity to her family network, while men's personal preferences are deprioritized. What might be considered compromise is, in practice, a quiet erosion of choice. Lifestyle surveys further document the contraction of freedom. A 2019 Pew Research Center study showed that single men report significantly higher levels of spontaneity in travel, social activity, and leisure spending compared to married men of the same age group. Household obligations, school schedules, caregiving duties, and spousal expectations reshape discretionary time into structured time. This reallocation is framed as necessary for stability, yet it restricts the independent exercise of personal interests. The financial frameworks of marriage reinforce these boundaries. Studies on household resource allocation consistently indicate that discretionary spending tilts toward collective goods, such as children's education or home improvements, leaving less available for individual pursuits. In consequence, what once was an outlet for identity or recreation becomes reclassified as indulgence and often discouraged. Cultural framing presents this exchange as beneficial. Security, safety, and predictability are positioned as superior to risk or freedom. However, the documented experiences of married men reveal an accompanying sense of confinement. Their ability to make decisions independent of family consensus narrows, while opportunities for flexibility diminish with each added responsibility. This trade, autonomy for stability, is rarely recognized explicitly. It operates gradually, embedded in routines, decisions, and financial obligations. Over time, what is lost is not only spontaneity, but also the resilience that stems from freedom of choice. This narrowing of personal space sets the stage for a deeper consequence: the emotional constriction that follows when independence is replaced by duty. It is to this emotional dimension that the record now turns. The emotional cost of marriage, though less visible than financial or social burdens, has been consistently recorded in health and sociological data. Surveys by the National Institute of Mental Health indicate that married men report higher rates of stress-related illness than their unmarried counterparts, particularly in households where the provider role is non-negotiable. The obligation to maintain strength for the family, both materially and emotionally, produces a form of silent pressure that is rarely addressed openly. Research on male mental health highlights this strain. A 2021 World Health Organization report noted that men in long-term marriages often underutilize counseling or emotional support services, citing stigma and the expectation of endurance as primary reasons. In effect, they remain without sanctioned outlets for personal struggle. Instead, responsibility is internalized, leading to documented increases in burnout, fatigue, and diminished life satisfaction. Patterns within divorce proceedings underscore this reality. Data from the American Psychological Association reveal that men frequently report emotional exhaustion as a contributing factor to marital breakdowns, while financial disputes and custody disagreements dominate public attention. Underlying reports describe years of suppressed dissatisfaction and unacknowledged strain. Studies on depression further confirm the toll. Comparative analyses show that while married men tend to live longer than single men, they also demonstrate higher rates of depressive symptoms tied to role stress, economic obligations, and constrained autonomy. The paradox is clear. Longevity does not equate to emotional resilience, and the very institution framed as supportive often becomes a source of psychological depletion. The evidence suggests that this outcome is not incidental. The systemic design of marriage place, as men in positions of unrelieved responsibility, discourages vulnerability and offers limited institutional recognition of their emotional burdens. Far from being a flaw, this structure appears consistent across cultures and legal frameworks. The cost to men's emotional resilience is therefore not accidental, but integral to the framework itself. This recognition leads to the next consideration. If the personal toll is not random, then marriage as an institution must be examined as a system intentionally structured in this way. The patterns observed in marriage cannot be reduced to coincidence or isolated circumstance. Historical and legal records indicate that the structure of marriage has long been designed to transfer responsibility toward men while distributing long-term benefits unevenly. From the codification of property rights in early European common law to the standardized practices of alimony in modern family courts, the framework of marriage has consistently reinforced asymmetrical obligations. Legal precedent provides the clearest evidence. In the 19th century, coverture laws in Western societies placed married women's property under the management of their husbands, a framework later replaced not by equality, but by systems of financial compensation, such as spousal support and asset division. Contemporary divorce statistics illustrate the continuation of this redistribution. In the majority of cases, men remain the primary payers of alimony and child support, even when both partners have participated in the workforce. Cultural reinforcements ensure that this arrangement persists across generations. Popular media, religious instruction, and family expectations continue to frame marriage as the natural progression of male adulthood, while simultaneously casting men as providers and protectors. The benefits of security, stability, and resource access accrue largely to women and children, while men's role as guarantors of these outcomes is rarely questioned. Economic analysis confirms the imbalance. Sociological studies on household wealth distribution show that post-divorce, women's standard of living often remains stable or improves due to support arrangements, while men's decline significantly. These outcomes are not presented as anomalies, but as expected consequences, built into the structure of marriage itself. The evidence across legal, cultural, and financial dimension demonstrates that marriage operates as a system of managed dependence. Men assume obligations by design, not by accident, while women receive protections embedded within law and custom. Awareness of this structure is minimal, and most men enter marriage without recognition of the systemic imbalance until it has already imposed its full weight. The record now turns to the final consideration, whether awareness, preparation, and boundary setting can mitigate these effects, offering men a path to engagement without subjugation. Records indicate that marriage as an institution has never been static. Across history, men have employed strategies to negotiate its terms, resist its pressures, or reform its structures. In earlier centuries, marriage contracts were sometimes arranged to preserve male inheritance lines, limiting financial exposure. In the 20th century, the rise of prenuptial agreements provided a legal mechanism to safeguard assets. In contemporary contexts, The growing prevalence of cohabitation without formal marriage reflects another form of structural resistance. Statistical data confirms these shifts. U.S. Census Bureau figures show a steady decline in marriage rates over the past 5 decades, with cohabitation rates rising significantly among younger generations. Pew Research Center surveys report that over 40% of adults under 30 now view marriage as optional rather than necessary, reflecting a generational re-evaluation of the institution. These trends align with broader cultural movements that prioritize individual autonomy and flexibility over traditional frameworks. Practical strategies within marriage also appear in the record. Boundaries established through explicit financial agreements, shared responsibility clauses, and equitable division of domestic labor reduce the likelihood of imbalance. Men who formalize expectations early, through written agreements or negotiated roles, retain greater independence and report higher levels of satisfaction. These measures demonstrate that the institution itself is not inherently adversarial, but its effects depend upon the clarity and structure established by its participants. The evidence therefore suggests that marriage does not require rejection, but conscious engagement. Awareness functions as the first line of defense, ensuring men recognize the historical and systemic pressures before entering the arrangement. B. Boundaries serve as the second, limiting the silent expansion of responsibility. Partner selection, informed by mutual respect for independence, remains the most decisive factor in determining outcomes. Without these measures, the cycle recorded across centuries continues unbroken. Responsibility concentrated on men, benefits distributed unevenly, and awareness arriving too late. With them, the cycle can be altered, or at minimum, its effects mitigated. The conclusion is factual and unavoidable. If men do not begin to question and adjust the inherited script, the system remains unchanged. The evidence is clear. Marriage is not accidental in its effects. It is structured, reinforced, and perpetuated by systems that reward compliance and punish questioning. But cycles only continue when they remain unchallenged. Awareness, boundaries, and conscious choice are the only means of altering the script. If this record has given you a perspective rarely spoken of, share it, discuss it. The cycle ends only when enough men choose to break it.